This program is about unsolved mysteries. Whenever possible, the actual family members and police officials have participated in recreating the events. What you are about to see is not a news broadcast.
Tonight on Unsolved Mysteries, in honor of Veterans Day, the compelling saga of America's last P.O.W. April 20th, 1965. American involvement in Southeast Asia was on the rise. Colonel Charles Shelton, an Air Force pilot stationed in Okinawa, said goodbye to his wife and children for the last time. 9 days later, Shelton was shot down and captured while on a top-secret reconnaissance flight over Laos. For the next 25 years, Shelton's wife, Marion, waged a valiant crusade to prove that her husband was still alive long after the war in Vietnam was over. In 1991, a young woman was driven to a remote area in Florida and brutally murdered by two men who thought they had committed the perfect crime. What they didn't know was that another man hiding nearby had seen everything. Also tonight, another edition of Special Alert. Authorities need your help to capture a convicted killer who recently escaped from prison. Join me. Perhaps you may be able to help solve a mystery. On a chilly morning in October of 1990, the family of Air Force pilot Charles E. Shelton was joined by friends and dignitaries at Arlington National Cemetery in Washington, D.C. They were gathered to mourn the death of an American hero. But it was not Colonel Shelton who was laid to rest that day. It was his wife, Marion. Marion Shelton spent the last 25 years of her life fighting what may be the final battle of the Vietnam War, a battle for the truth about her husband and more than 2,000 other American servicemen missing and unaccounted for since the war's end. Colonel Charles Shelton was shot down in the spring of 1965, long before Vietnam had become a household word. Today, Colonel Shelton has earned a unique but tragic honor. He is the only missing serviceman still officially listed as a prisoner of war. Representatives of the armed services declined to participate in this broadcast. Though more than a quarter century has passed, the story of Colonel Shelton is still the subject of intense controversy. According to Charles Shelton's family, precious little diplomatic or military effort was ever expended by the U.S. government to actually find Colonel Shelton and bring him home. Some believe that his prisoner of war status is simply a concession to P.O.W. activists and a commemoration of his legendary resistance as a captive. But strong evidence suggests that Colonel Shelton and perhaps other servicemen missing in Southeast Asia may still be alive. To Shelton's family, the possibility seems very real that one day they will celebrate the return of America's last P.O.W. Charles Shelton and Marion Volman were high school sweethearts. They married in 1951, and their family quickly grew to include 5 children. But Charles and Marion always acted as though they were still on their honeymoon.
Is everybody ready? Now look at the camera.
My father and my mother's relationship, they were very much in love with each other. They were each other's first loves.
Charles!
Even after 10 years of marriage, it was just real intense, and he often said that she was his first love and only love and last love.
Charles joined the Air Force in 1954 and moved rapidly through the ranks. At the time, American involvement in Vietnam was quietly and steadily on the rise. Charles Shelton was swept up in the tide. In 1962, Shelton was sent to Saigon to train Vietnamese pilots. 3 years later, he began flying top-secret photo reconnaissance flights over Laos.
In 1965, Dad was definitely at the peak of his career. He was just about finished with his tour of duty in the secret part of the war in Indochina. He had been, at that time, the senior tactical reconnaissance United States Air Force pilot involved in the war in Laos.
Laos borders Vietnam on the west. Although officially neutral during the war, Laotian territory was used by North Vietnam as a staging area. The United States bombed targets there frequently and covertly.
Now you kids go wait in the car for your mother.
Okay.
Colonel Shelton was stationed in Okinawa, Japan, where his wife and children joined him. But he was often gone for weeks at a time, and enduring the pain of separation became a familiar duty for Marion and Charles.
Bye.
Bye.
I'll wait right here till you get back.
You better.
On April 20th, 1965, they had no idea they were saying goodbye for the last time.
Dad's 33rd birthday, April 29th, 1965. Although he wasn't home, the family decided to celebrate the birthday anyway. On that day, Mom invited some friends of hers and their children, other officer wives and their families over to the home to celebrate his birthday.
Hi, Don.
Marion?
I thought you were flying today. Hi, Mike.
Marion, I need to talk to you.
What is it?
Marion, Charles' plane was shot down a couple hours ago. Oh, he's all right. They've been in radio contact with him. There's a search and rescue mission underway even as we speak.
Where is he?
He went into the area called the Plain of Jars in northern Laos, near the Pathet Lao headquarters in Sam Nue.
This is Grasshopper 32. Come in, Whiskey Angel.
American planes made visual and radio contact with Shelton. But before rescue helicopters could reach him, a sudden change in the weather sealed his fate.
There was a low cloud coverage, which made it impossible for anybody to get in really close and maneuver without a tremendous amount of danger. So Dad was left sitting on that hill for 3 days waiting, and nobody ever came.
There was just no organized rescue in those days. That was 1965, he was shot down. If he was shot down in 1968, at the place he was shot down at, I think he'd been out of there in an hour and a half.
For 3 days, Shelton eluded capture by the Pathet Lao, the communist forces operating in the area.
A platoon of Pathet Lao surrounded Dad. One of the Pathet Lao present actually was an informer for our government and reported the story. He said that they apprehended him, and the story ends, that particular intelligence report, saying that Dad's body went limp, forcing his captors to have to carry him.
Charles Shelton's defiant resistance would become legendary among American servicemen and even win the grudging respect of his captors.
He was tough, and he was tenacious, and he just didn't let go. I think that if anyone could survive over there, it'd be Charlie Shelton. No doubt in my mind.
Marion Shelton was officially informed that her husband was a prisoner of war. His personal effects, returned by Air Force officials, were a somber reminder of his predicament, but they also raised deeply troubling questions. Inside the footlocker, Marion found her husband's dog tags and his military ID, which are normally carried by Air Force personnel at all times. Marion also found her husband's camera. When developed, the roll of film inside included this picture, shot just before Shelton's ill-fated flight. He was wearing what is known as a sanitized uniform, devoid of any official insignia. Many years passed before the Shelton family would fully understand its tragic implications.
If you were captured in Laos, you were never going to come out. The war in Laos was that sensitive that the government was not going to bother with politicizing our presence there by looking for the return of POWs or hostages. And to this date, I don't believe our government has ever admitted to having troops present in Laos officially, and we've never negotiated for the men in Laos officially.
3 months after Charles was shot down, Marion and the children returned to Kentucky.
Leanne, honey, don't drag those on the ground.
While the war in Vietnam dragged on for 8 more years, rumors and unofficial accounts of Charles Shelton filtered through the military grapevine and back to the United States.
From time to time, pilots would come through from Indochina, and they would come with some news by word of mouth about Dad's situation. They'd come through, tell Mom that Dad was sick or healthy, if he'd been wounded or if he'd escaped again or this type of thing.
Mama kept a lot of that information away from us because, again, she was afraid that that would hurt us. And I didn't want to hear it. I loved my father. I loved him very much. And when Mama started telling me stories about what had happened to Dad, I heard about him being kept in a shallow grave with bars over it, and they poked him, trying to keep him awake. I couldn't stand to hear about stuff about torture.
I have asked for this radio and television time tonight for the purpose of announcing that we today have concluded an agreement to end the war and bring peace with honor in Vietnam.
Finally, on January 27, 1973, President Richard Nixon appeared on national television with a message that Americans had been so desperate to hear.
Washington time. Within 60 days from this Saturday, all Americans held prisoners of war throughout Indochina will be released. There will be the fullest possible accounting for all of those who are missing in action.
The family was told that all POWs would be included on one of 2 lists: those who were coming home and those who had perished in captivity.
Those lists were scheduled to be turned over to our government, and we understood that the Defense Department would be calling the families all day long, letting them know whether or not their husband or father's name was on which list. Finally, the phone rang way late into the night.
Hello? Yes, I am. I see. Thank you.
She began to cry, and of course I knew what that meant. Dad's name wasn't on the list. We naturally concluded that therefore, we would be told soon just how he died in captivity and his body returned, and that was the end of the story. And I think we all felt, although a sense of loss at the time, there was also an even greater sense of relief that the waiting was over.
January 1973, Operation Homecoming. For most Americans, the return of 591 POWs seemed to signal at last the end of the war. Soon after, in April of 1973, the Pentagon issued a statement that stunned the families of those servicemen still missing in Southeast Asia. there was no indication that American POWs were alive anywhere.
Mom realized, I think, more and more that if Dad would ever come home or if any of the prisoners would come home, that it really depended on the efforts of the families. And she seemed convinced of that early on, you know, so much so that she ventured into Southeast Asia.
August 1973, only a few months after the end of the Vietnam War, Marion left the safety of Kentucky and traveled halfway around the world. Accompanied by reporter Leah Larkin, she visited the jungles in Laos that had claimed her husband. Marion's pilot and guide was an American operative fluent in local dialects.
We met with villagers where he was supposed to have been or was held alive in a cave. There were sightings of him in the cave. And some of the villagers had actually visited some of these caves and had seen prisoners.
My husband.
She'd hoped that she would get some positive proof that her husband was still alive. She got no positive proof.
She says they've never seen him.
People said, yes, there must be men alive, but nothing really, no concrete evidence.
Very sorry.
One day she'd convince herself he must be dead. There's no way he could still be alive. Then the next day something would happen to give her a glimmer of hope. It was this constant going back from one to the other. He's dead, no, he's not dead. And I think, that's a torment that's very difficult to live with, and it's obviously torment that plagued her the rest of her life.
Marion Shelton returned home empty-handed and disheartened. But 2 years later, events in Southeast Asia provided a windfall of new information and new hope. On April 29, 1975, Saigon fell to communist forces. It was 10 years to the day after Charles Shelton was shot down. Thousands of refugees fled Vietnam, crowded into vessels that were barely seaworthy. These so-called boat people brought stories about American servicemen that sent shockwaves through the P.O.W. MIA movement.
And they came out all over Southeast Asia, Hong Kong, Malaysia, the Philippines, Thailand, and hundreds and then thousands told of seeing American pilots, American prisoners, still in chains, gaunt, starving, begging for food, in prison, in captivity, on work gangs. This is how we knew for sure that our men were left behind.
This propaganda film, shot in North Vietnam, shows American POWs held during the war. According to the refugees, many were still alive 2 years after the war had ended. For reasons that remain the subject of controversy, the U.S. government withheld the refugees' accounts in classified files.
The stories are overwhelming in their specificity, in their clarity, and in their numbers. But if you mark it secret and you keep it locked up in the safes behind locked doors, behind guarded doors, then we don't know it's there.
Eventually, through the Freedom of Information Act, Marion obtained hundreds of classified documents pertaining to her husband. Credible sources, many of them CIA operatives, reported that Charles was alive even as late as 1983, 18 years after he parachuted into Laos.
There were so many documents that said Colonel Shelton and other men were alive. It was apparent that there was just such a gigantic amount of evidence. There are reports in his file that he was shot in the legs because they were so tired of him escaping, and more reports that he just kept trying to escape afterwards.
A particular report that was picked up off of the radio between Pathet Lao headquarters and Hanoi indicated that in 1968, the Pathet Lao turned Dad over to the North Vietnamese, and they decided to interrogate him.
Charles Shelton. I have heard about you.
Ông biết tôi con là gì? Ông biết tôi con là gì? Bao!
Vietnamese returned with more personnel to apprehend and control Dad, they found that he had already killed the other guards that were present during the interrogation. The report finished with the recommendation that this prisoner be moved north. Whether that meant to China or Vietnam, we can't be sure, but it commented that he was incorrigible.
The more Marion dug through official records, the more she believed her husband was still alive. These often vivid accounts became her ammunition for a bureaucratic showdown on October 7th, 1980. Prior to hearings in San Antonio, Texas, 793 Air Force servicemen already had their classification changed to presumed dead. Marion was determined to convince the government that her husband was still alive.
When I was in Vietnam and Laos in 1973, I met with a delegation of the North Vietnamese. I was seeking any information I could find regarding the fate of my husband. When I asked specifically about my husband, I was told by the North Vietnamese, "Why are you asking us when your own government says they are all dead?" I am terribly disappointed that our government has made it so easy for them to evade an accounting. I feel that presuming people...
When they set up and decided to hold these status review hearings, I don't think they had any idea about burden of proof. Burden of proof is a legal concept.
Mrs. Shelton.
What they were going to do was make the service member's family come in and prove he was still alive when the only information about whether he was really alive was in the hands of the government. That seemed quite unfair.
Did he have a mustache?
We argued that instead it should be the service's duty to prove that he should be changed to killed in action. In other words, what evidence do they have that he was dead? They do have evidence he was alive. Now, what evidence do they have to change that?
The board finds that by a preponderance of the evidence, Colonel Charles E. Shelton can reasonably be presumed dead. These findings were reached by a majority decision of the board.
4 years later, Secretary of the Air Force Vernon Orr refused to accept the board's recommendation. In 1984, he upheld Charles Shelton's status as a prisoner of war, making him the only one of more than 2,000 missing servicemen not listed as presumed dead.
Do you think your husband's alive?
I think he very well can be, and probably is.
It was a weary Marion Shelton who took to the airwaves in the late 1980s. Before national audiences that numbered in the millions, she continued to press for a vigorous follow-up to the reports of surviving POWs.
They know there's prisoners over there, and I think they know that my husband's over there.
My mom was so busy doing a lot of the POW things and going all over the country and speaking and on television, and she didn't know how to cope with it. And when she would come home, she would drink in private and sleep.
She couldn't take it any longer. She knew that Colonel Shelton was alive. She knew many other men were alive, and she could not stand to hear the U.S. government continually lie about it.
Slowly, her heart started to break that the United States government, what my dad fought for, was not going to bring him home or was not trying hard enough. So it devastated her. Her American dream that we were all supposed to have was broken.
Despair finally overwhelmed Marion Shelton. On several occasions in 1987 and 88, she was hospitalized for alcohol abuse. Marion's 25-year struggle for her husband's freedom finally came to an end on October 4th, 1990. Her body was discovered by friends on the patio of her home. Marion Shelton had shot herself in the head.
Marion Shelton was the POW movement. She's done more, did more while she was alive than just about any other person to try to bring those men home.
Charles was my childhood sweetheart. my best friend, my protector. I prepared myself, as did my husband, for him to be wounded, captured, or killed. But we were never prepared for him to be abandoned by his own country.
I do know that there are men still there, and I'm pretty sure my dad's one of them. And even if he died 10 years ago, I blame our government for not bringing him home and leaving him behind.
To those people who would listen to our story and just conclude that we're living in a kind of fantasy land, I would remind them that 2 years ago, the government of the Soviet Union repatriated to Japan 70 prisoners of war taken from Japan in World War II. And that the French were still being released by the Vietnamese as late as the 70s and early 80s, who were captured at Dien Bien Phu in 1954. So it's not unusual for, as we see, communist governments keeping citizens as long as they want to. And sometimes prisoners can live, obviously, for decades in captivity.
Albuquerque, New Mexico, August 18th, 1984.
I've been hit.
10:25 p.m.
Where you hit? Twice. Where? Oh, real bad in the arm. 332. 32. 1083. We got shots fired. Start 4355.
10:28 p.m. Police units respond to that most urgent and personal of emergency calls. Officer is down.
I knew I was losing a lot of blood, and I was worried about that. And it was getting hard to breathe because of the wound in my side in my left lung area. But I had an attitude that I was not going to die, that I was going to make it through it. And I think that helped a lot.
How is he? Pretty good. He's doing all right. Got 2 hits here. One right here. Got one in the arm right here.
Vic Webb had been on the Albuquerque police force for 5 years, and this incident was the first time he had ever fired his gun on duty.
What happened?
During the shootout, Webb was struck twice. Without the rapid response of his fellow officers, he would almost certainly have died.
Hang in there. Hang in there.
At any moment on any patrol, police officers must expect the unexpected. The night he was nearly killed, Vic Webb and another officer entered a local pool hall with an arrest warrant for a female suspect in a fraud case. Instead, they found themselves face to face with a trigger-happy ex-con. The evening began when Officer Rick Foley sat down at the police crime computer. He discovered an outstanding arrest warrant for a woman he wanted to question on another case.
Click on an outstanding bench warrant, please.
An informant told Foley that the suspect frequented an Albuquerque tavern called Gary's Game Room. Foley and Vic Webb arrived at around 10 p.m.
Another bench warrant?
Yeah. Says you were seen in several places around the area here.
Although they were not ordinarily partners, Webb had volunteered to assist in serving the warrant.
When we walked in, we noticed some people sitting at a bar off to the left, and a couple of people playing pool.
You guys need some help with something?
Just looking.
Towards the back of the room, there was a dark hallway. So we decided to move back towards the back and take a look.
Drop your guns. Give me your guns. Give them to me now!
This was a situation where we were caught absolutely cold, and here was a guy pointing a gun at us, demanding our weapons.
I'd been out of the academy for approximately a year and a half, 2 years, fairly new on the department, and my first thoughts were I couldn't believe this was happening to me. I snapped back into reality and knew that if, in fact, he was gonna shoot me or kill me, I didn't want it to be inside the game room.
His first round hit me in the side, and I was wearing a bulletproof vest at the time, but this round went in between the two panels on my side and entered the rib area.
Although the first shot had broken 2 ribs, Officer Webb managed to pull his own weapon and return fire.
We were probably about 3 feet apart at this time, but he was on one side of the wall and I was on the other side. I had fired 5 to 6 rounds by this time, and he was continuing to fire back through the sheetrock.
A bullet ripped through Webb's right arm, severing an artery and destroying nerves. His shooting hand was rendered useless. Webb made his way to the exit and struggled to his feet. Only later did authorities realize that the suspect had picked up Webb's gun and used it to make his escape. The alleged assailant was subsequently identified as Lyle Moody, a paroled armed robber with a criminal record stretching back 17 years. The great irony in this case is that the fraud suspect Webb and Foley were initially seeking had been arrested 18 months before, but her name had never been removed from the police computer. Since the night of the shootout, Lyle Moody has been spotted in Los Lunas, New Mexico, Oxnard, California, and Montebello, Colorado, where he was last seen in March of 1985.
I would hope that the police officers who run across him the next time know who he is and know how dedicated he is to not going back to prison. My fear is that he's going to be cornered by some other officers who may not know who he is, and more police officers are going to get hurt.
Recently, we were contacted by the FBI with an urgent request. They hoped that our viewers might assist in locating a convicted murderer who had just escaped from the state penitentiary in Bismarck, North Dakota. Please watch closely. Perhaps you will recognize Richard Lee McNair.
You want to live here for the rest of your life? The rest of your life, man. There's no Burger Kings, no Dairy Queens, no McDonald's. This is it. This is all there is.
While in prison, Richard McNair eagerly assisted authorities in presenting crime prevention programs to local teenagers.
Richard McNair was really a model prisoner here at the state pen. He was the editor of the inmate newspaper, very polite to staff, and most people seemed to like him.
Behind his facade of cooperation, McNair was dedicated to breaking out of prison. His first attempt in April of 1991 was a failure, but McNair persisted. On the evening of October 9th, 1992, McNair and 2 other inmates finally discovered a weak link in the prison's security.
Mr. McNair and the other 2 individuals who escaped with him at the time were in an education room. They worked their way through the air vent coming into that room and crawled up into a mechanical space where the vents for the institution are. They then entered a second vent which leads to the roof area of the institution.
The 3 inmates made their way over a series of rooftops and through several coils of razor wire. Finally, after dropping 15 feet to the ground, they were out of the prison.
As soon as they hit the second roof, they were heard by the officer who immediately reported it to the captain. Our captain ran out of the institution as the three individuals were running about 50 feet in front of her to the south of the penitentiary. She then radioed for help.
Within 48 hours, 2 of the convicts were recaptured. However, Richard McNair is still on the run. Authorities believe McNair may have stolen a light blue 1990 Chevrolet pickup truck like this one, missing from H.A. Thompson & Sons Plumbing Company, 2 miles west of the prison. McNair may be headed to Oklahoma, where his family lives, or to Washington State, where he has a girlfriend.
We consider McNair extremely dangerous, very volatile, very violent. The original crime he was charged with in November of 1987 was a shooting death. He has said he will not come back, he will not be taken. McNair is extremely dangerous.
Next, a mysterious witness reports a brutal murder in Florida. For the police, nothing is more frustrating than a case where they are virtually positive they know who committed a murder, but have no way of proving it. Florida authorities are caught in just such a dilemma. Their only hope of closing the case is to locate an unknown eyewitness, a man who called the Miami Police Department on May 1st, 1991.
Police and fire.
The caller told a police operator that he had witnessed a horrible crime in Belle Glade, 80 miles north of Miami.
Mire, yo soy un ciudadano que vi cuando mataron una persona. Sí. En Belle Glade. Yo le cogí el número de la chapa. ¿En dónde le mataron?
The operator could not fully understand the caller, so she connected him to Detective Bert Blanco. In a rushed, nervous voice, the caller began to describe a grisly scene which he had witnessed several days earlier. He said he was hunting illegally in a sugarcane field when he heard a vehicle in the distance. The man stated that as he ran to hide, a blue Ford Bronco pulled up nearby. A man and a woman got out. She called him Ricardito. What you are about to hear is a translation of the eyewitness's phone call to the police.
They started to argue, the girl and him. It appeared to be a drug problem. He was telling her to give him the money. She told him she could not give him the money yet. There were 2 of them. The young man appeared to be Cuban, and the other Mexican, by the way he spoke. She was shouting, "Ricardito, don't kill me, Ricardito." After he killed her, he dragged her away. So I got down on my knees because I thought if this person sees me, they're going to kill me too. Then the Bronco pulled away. I saw a 7 and a 2 on the license plate. Then I left because I was scared. But later I thought it's a crime.
The mysterious caller had said that the sugarcane field was behind a building shaped like an ice cream cone. Detective Frank Mayo of the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Department in Belle Glade was assigned to investigate.
I left the station and went down to the area of the Twisty Tree. And once I was there, I looked around and I saw a set of tree lines about a mile south of the Twisty Tree. So I decided to drive to that area and start searching the tree line. As I was passing along the tree line in my vehicle, I saw like a small brown object over in the tall grass area. Not knowing at that time what it was, I stopped the car and I got out and I walked over to the bushes. And after I got there, I realized it was the body of a female at that time, but the body was in a state at which, at that time, I couldn't determine which race it was.
Detective Mayo notified headquarters. A team of homicide investigators was immediately dispatched to the scene.
It was a very heinous crime. It was very violent.
I believe that the suspect had a lot of disregard for human life, a lot of disregard. She had been laying there for approximately a week, maybe a few days longer. She had passed the decomposition stage and she had started to get into mummification. How we identified her was her right thumbprint was the only print left. The majority of her fingers had already turned to skeleton. And with that right thumbprint, we were able to make an identification and prove that she was, in fact, Rebecca Young.
Rebecca Young was a 21-year-old resident of Belle Glade. In a terrible irony, Rebecca's mother had also been murdered. Rebecca was 12 years old at the time and went to live with her Aunt Lucille.
We had a very close relationship. We was friends, we was sisters, we was mother and daughter, we was grandparents too, And this is the way I raised her and her brother. Rebecca was a very quiet, shy girl, and she was the type, she would do anything she possibly could for anybody. She was the type of child I would give anything to have over again.
Police began to dig into Rebecca Young's background, looking for a murder suspect. They soon discovered that after high school, Rebecca had become involved with a man known to be a petty criminal.
She had gotten hooked up with a person locally who had gotten her into a different type of life than she was accustomed to. He started introducing her to the drug scene and prostitution and things of this nature. He had beat her up on more than one occasion and had intimidated her and threatened her into this type of lifestyle.
While police have determined that the man is not a suspect in Rebecca's murder, they do believe that his petty thievery may have led to her death.
This person may have robbed the client without Rebecca's knowledge that he was going to do this. Rebecca may have suffered the consequences as a result of his actions.
On May 14, 1991, 3 weeks after Rebecca Young's murder, the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Department detained a possible suspect. He was a local man who had reportedly told a prostitute that he killed a black woman. When the man was pulled over, police suspected that he was drunk.
See, man, I'm clean, man. See? I'm clean, man. Sir, step out of the road. What'd you stop me for?
Sir, step to the back of your car.
I know what you guys want,
right
man.
there,
Come on,
sir.
give me a break.
Sir, step to the back of your car.
On, man, I didn't do nothing.
Sir, step to the back of your car. Don't move.
Come on, man.
Before I could interview him, he told me that I wanted to talk to him about a murder. And when I told him, no, I wanted to talk to him about the prostitute he had been out with, he said, I don't want to talk to you, I want an attorney. And at that point where we didn't have any further evidence that he was involved in this, I had to release him.
Even though the suspect would eventually be released, police feel certain that he was involved in Rebecca Young's murder. They are now engaged in an all-out search for the elusive eyewitness who had originally telephoned them to report the crime. Little is known about the man except that his first name is Antonio. He said he called from a payphone because he did not have a telephone at home. Judging from Antonio's accent, police believe he was born in Cuba. This is a portion of the actual tape recording of Antonio's telephone call.
Entonces estoy cazando con él y veo que llega un bronco azul con la chapa 72. Entonces ellos empezaron a discutir, la muchacha y él. Entonces él le parece que es un problema de droga, ¿no? Entonces donde él le decía que le entregara.
Police in Florida, as well as the friends and family of Rebecca Young, want to urge Antonio to come forward. It should be emphasized that he is not wanted for any crime. On our next Unsolved Mysteries, you'll meet George Anderson, whose apparent psychic abilities have amazed believers and baffled skeptics. He says he can help grieving families by communicating with their lost loved ones from beyond the grave. It sounds unbelievable, but you can judge for yourself as we take you to an actual session with this intriguing man. Join me next time for another edition of Unsolved Mysteries.
5.